It is between Gabriel Nassif and Eli Loveman, and this is a game 3 to decide who gets into the top 8.
And this is a matchup we actually just saw, right? We had Jeskai Fires going up against Mono Red here.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to Magic the Gathering for Advanced Players. I'm Matt Sperling. As you just heard Marshall tee up, today we're talking about Eli Loveman versus Gabriel Nassif playing into the top 8 of the World Championship this last weekend. So the way the structure worked, there were a few paths that kind of get you where you're trying to go faster, where if you win the match, you're in. If you lose, you get kicked down to a loser's bracket and try to wind your way back in. So it ended up that both these players made top 8 eventually, but the winner of this match went straight there, and the loser had some more winning to do in order to get there. So let's take a look at the deck list. Eli Loveman is playing Mono Red. This is a version kind of tuned, expecting to play against slower decks, although maybe not particularly Jeskai Fire, since that was a little bit under the radar, but certainly expecting to play against Blue-White, Temur Reclamation, that sort of thing. So Robber of the Rich makes an appearance, for example. The sideboard has some slower tools, which will come up, since we're talking about Game 3 of the match we're going to be taking a look at. Those slower cards, the Akroan War of particular interest, and also, cards like Experimental Frenzy that cost 4 mana as well, that might be valuable against a deck with a lot of removal, post-sideboard, that sort of thing. Okay, Gabriel Nassif chose to show up with a Jeskai Fires list, a deck that we're familiar with now in Standard, but was kind of off the radar, like I mentioned. Sort of a curveball, but certainly strong in this red matchup. Thinking about cards like Bonecrusher Giant, Deafening Clarion to stay competitive early, and then Fires of Invention with these huge creatures to blow the lid off, and then 3 Kenrith, which is another concession to maybe I might play against red, a card that has utility in multiple matchups, so they didn't skimp on that either, and a sideboard with some additional tooling just to help you maintain control of the game, Chandra's Pyrohelix, that sort of thing.
Eli Loveman just looking to punk people out with his Mono Red deck. And let's see
he's getting punked out here. Mulligan into Mulligan. He can't keep this one. So he's going to have to go down to 5 here, but now he's got a keeper at least.
Yeah.
And with some real hope here, too. That Experimental Frenzy can do some pretty busted things, although the versions of Mono Red that we've seen here are a little less skewed in that direction than the versions of Yore.
Yeah, and also, I've seen less people run Frenzy because the Mono Red decks just play less burn spells. That's kind of your win condition against kind of these slower control decks, or, where you're kind of on the aggressive side, where you have the Frenzy in play, then you start hitting your opponent with a barrage of shocks and other burn spells. But I don't know if that's necessarily the case here. Eli's got some interesting cards here after Cyber 2. We see the Akroan War here. Sure, he's mulling it to 5, but hey, you got the 1-drop. Go into light up the stage, which will help kind of soften the blow of that mull to 5.
Loveman's like, come on, buddy, make your choice. Because he can't pick the cards to put back until Nassif is done.
Yeah. It's probably a tough decision here for Loveman too, so he's probably still trying to figure out what exactly he's going to be
No
doing.
way. He kept it. He knows he's putting those 4 drops back. He's ready to rumble. Let's get this Scorch Spitter in the red zone. Now, interestingly, by the way, we just heard from Marcio Carvalho, and he said, no, I like this matchup. Like, give me this all day. I want to play this matchup.
So here, after some deliberation from Nassif, which viewers got accustomed to, our first real decision of the game from Loveman's side, not whether to mulligan to 5, those were kind of automatic, but what to keep, which 2 cards to throw on the bottom. And I think, although there are 3 4-drops here, and obviously you're going to want to keep Scorch Spitter, light up the stage, your early resources that are kind of with 2 mountains, that's an ideal kind of start on a mull to 5. Which of these 4 drops is most valuable to keep, and which 2 go on the bottom becomes a really interesting decision. Torbrand is a really powerful 4-drop, one that you play, a ton of copies of, but it tends to be more of the last kind of flurry when a bunch of other stuff is going on. It's going to power that other stuff up, get you over the finish line. There's some powerful starts that tend to involve 7 cards or 6 cards because it really doesn't play all that well on low resources. Should your Scorch Spitter get Bonecrusher Giant stomped or whatever, it's not going to do all that much on its own, whereas the Akroan War and Experimental Frenzy can do a lot on their own, so they're much more well-suited to a 5-card hand. But now, between them, Experimental Frenzy and the Akroan War, my instinct is certainly Experimental Frenzy is kind of the perfect card on a mull to 5 with light up the stage, hopefully find an extra land or 2. When you're really resource light, Experimental Frenzy changes the whole dynamic of the game, and then you're playing from the top of your library. It almost doesn't even matter that you mulled to 5 in a lot of contexts. And so my instinct would be to keep the Experimental Frenzy. It's kind of a card that's great out of a mull to 5. The Akroan War, however, is a card that Eli had more experience in this kind of matchup with, and he actually viewed this as a really important card in the matchup and kind of a trump card of sorts, meaning you can kind of steal games with it. and it didn't really matter if you don't have a whole lot of else going on. You could still use it, grab something like Kenrith, and really swing a game around. So that is a card that's worth considering. I lean Experimental Frenzy still, just intuitively. It just seems so perfect for this kind of draw. But I think as we see how these things play out, the argument for the Crone War does start to play in.
He's playing the deck that Nassif's on.
Right.
All right, so he kept the Crone War, got rid of Frenzy plus Torbrand, and now we're going to see that Spitter hit the battlefield. And you can see Nassif was actually resolving his scries from Sphinx of Foresight, or he will be in a moment.
Yeah, and with what Nassif wants is just early interaction here. He's got fires into Sphinx, but really needs to find, some of those cheap 2-mana removal effects to help deal with the early onslaught from the mono red deck.
So he's got lands otherwise?
Yeah, it looks like 4 lands of fires in the Sphinx.
Well, Scry 3 does go a long way, and he put all 3 on top.
Wow, that cannot be a good feeling if you're Eli Loveman.
Yeah, especially when you've mulligan to 5. Okay, Runaway Steamkin might be the ideal draw here on 2, though. He gets to get in for a couple with a Scorch Spitter, knocking Nassif down to 18 before passing the turn back. No more lands in hand, though, for Loveman. He is going to need to find some off of a Light Up the Stage or just naturally.
The next decision point we're going to zoom in on is actually Nassif's second turn, and now we're going to need to understand what's going on from his side of the table. So if you look at the hand, a couple Fabled Passage, a Temple of Triumph. So some lands that come into play tapped, at least for the first 3 turns. A Plains, which comes into play untapped. Fires of Invention, Sphinx of Foresight, Bone Crusher Giant, something to do on turn 2 potentially with Stomp, and then Deafening Clarion, which had been scryed to top with the Sphinx of Foresight ability. So Deafening Clarion coming, but no untapped third land. And Nassif has to decide, is it going to be Plains and Stomp to really immediately take some wind out of my opponent's sail, or is it going to be tapped land in the form of Temple of Triumph, really, because Fabled Passage would shuffle away the Deafening Clarion, which you don't want. So it's going to be Temple of Triumph, and then untap and Deafening Clarion everything away. My instinct here would be to go for the Clarion. I mean, when an opponent is mulled to 5 and has only 2 cards in hand, the odds that they go like triple spell to get the Steamkin out of range, pretty low. I mean, it can happen, and Light Up the Stage is one of the cards that can make it happen, but still, you'd have to have Light Up the Stage, and things would have to break really cleanly for you to ever get that Steamkin out of range. And then the Steamkin itself actually encourages additional commitments. Now, there is a card that looms pretty large in the form of Anax, and Anax is a card that we don't see here on screen, but it's a big part of any matchup this red deck is playing. It's a critical piece. If that would be the third turn play, then all of a sudden, it would be 4 Devotion, and it would be making 2 Satyrs. So if you decide to use Stomp here, you're kind of worried about that being turn 3 for Loveman. So Nassif kind of has to think through all of this, right? What are the chances that turn 3 is not that with my opponent's 2-card hand? If it is, how far back am I? Then what am I supposed to do then? Then do I stomp a 2/2 Steamkin the following turn instead of clearing? I mean, you're kind of stuck. You could end up getting run over by Satyrs. It's a calculated risk to go for the Clarion, but I think it feels like it's probably worth it here. However, I think Nassif ultimately felt like, you know what, I'm ahead on resources. I just want to slow down the Steamkin. I actually should be playing to my worst case scenario, which is either the Steamkin somehow getting to 4/4 or a Nax coming out and rendering Clarion less effective than it otherwise would be. So Nassif's going to go for Stomp here, but I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. And I think I actually would have gone set up for Clarion and say, look, if the opponent happens to have both a third land and the Anax, I'm going to have to play this game a little differently. But so what? I'll at least have my Bone Crusher Giant still. I can stomp something, play a 4/3. But it's an interesting spot, no question.
And there's that early interaction that you mentioned, Paul. It is a Bone Crusher Giant, one of the cards that Nassif had on top of his library.
Yeah, so the thing Nassif is contemplating here is whether or not he wants to run out the Bone Crusher Giant under Runaway Steamkin or play the Temple of Triumph because he sees that the Deafening Clarion's on top. And it looks like, given that Eli's mulligan down to 5, just, don't take any chances, right? Don't take any risks. Get that Runaway Steamkin off the battlefield, and that, you're up on cards. You're going to be looking pretty good here.
All right, here we go. Loveman drew Unchained Berserker. He wants to try to find a land off of Light Up the Stage, and he did.
The next turn we're going to look at is on Eli's third turn. He gets in with Scorch Spitter, has Light Up the Stage, has a 2-drop, has 2 lands. I think very wisely decides, okay, we'll start with Light Up the Stage because if I hit a land, I can still play my 2-drop, and I just want to kind of try to start getting more land drops. I've got the Crone War that costs 4, etc. It's just, it makes perfect sense. But then gets into kind of a playing too quickly pattern, which is a lot of players can identify with this, myself included. Sometimes you're just going through the motions a little bit. It's been a long day. He immediately casts the second light up the stage when he hits it off of the first. So he casts light up the stage for 1 red. It hits mountain, light up the stage. Well, now there actually is a very important decision tree. You can play a third mountain rather, second untapped, cast your 1/1 pro white, and leave light up the stage in exile for next turn. Now there is a danger that because your opponent has this exiled Bonecrusher Giant, if that's what Nassif uses Nassif's third turn on, and I have these 2 creatures out, neither of them can just easily get an attack in for damage without either sacrificing itself in the case of Scorch Spitter or just getting blocked, which doesn't turn it on. But had Eli slowed down, taken a breath, and said, what's the right play? I think he actually gets to a place where he realizes, no, it's better to put the 1/1 pro white out there. It doesn't care about Deafening Clarion, which is great. You know the opponent doesn't have Chandra's Pyro Helix to blow you out, because that would have happened last turn when you had 2 1/1s out. So it's actually better to play that. If your opponent plays Bonecrusher Giant, okay, you can decide to either, sacrifice the Scorch Spitter for 4 damage and cheapen the light up the stage, which doesn't sound so bad. Or maybe you draw a 4th land, you can Acroan War, take the Bonecrusher Giant, connect for 4, and maybe that's how you win this game. Or simply, if you decide, I'll just pay the Iron Price, 3 mana for the light up the stage, and there's not really much given up if that's all you've got to do anyways. So that sounds a lot more attractive to me than firing off a second light up the stage, keeping that Berserker in hand where it's not super effective, and letting Nassif kind of play on the front foot now, whether it's Bonecrusher Giant or something else. So I think this is a somewhat subtle but significant, inaccuracy from Loveman, not slowing down and thinking deeply about what's the right sequencing on these second light up the stage in particular.
Well, he's going to hit his land drops going forward, but he doesn't get to develop his board this turn because he casts the other light up the stage.
Yeah, interesting that he went for that. I think I would have leaned towards playing out the Unchained Berserker. Even if your opponent has a Deafening Clarion, you're looking okay, and you're putting additional pressure onto the battlefield.
Yeah, he wanted to get it while the getting was good. He wouldn't have an option to cast that, but it did set him back pretty severely. Now, he does play Annex, Hardened to the Forge the next turn, and he does have Nassif down to 14, so maybe some hope for him, but right as I say that, there's that Deafening Clarion as well.
Right, but like Nassif now, I mean, he's looking pretty good here, right? Yeah. He's going to be able to go Fires of Invention into either Sphinx or Deafening Clarion. Probably lean towards the Deafening Clarion because you don't want to get Ember Cleaved.
Okay, sure. And also Annex is
3/3.
Yeah, only going to give the 1 token from Annex and 1 for the Spitter. So Nassif's going to go get a Mountain, and we're going to see Fires of Invention. This is exactly how he mapped things out. And then probably the Clarion, though he could just cast Sphinx of Foresight if he'd like.
He could. I mean, but then Eli would run out the Acroan War and get in for a good chunk of damage.
He really would, yeah. Whew.
That would be 10 damage. On the following turn.
The Acroan War lets you gain control of target creature for as long as the Acroan War is on the battlefield. And the game plan when you're mono red is that's the end of the game. All right, so we're going to see 2 Satyr tokens off of Annex, but that's it. That's all that's left. Here's Unchained Berserker into Fervent Champion. And again, the card that Nassif is probably thinking about the most here is Embercleave, and there isn't one to be found. So,
wow.
Deafening Clarion number 2.
Yeah, this is huge.
For Nassif. That could be the one that sends him into the top 8 right there.
Right. He can go Clarion into Stomp from the Bonecrusher Giant to get the entire board off.
Wow.
And he's going to have nothing left.
Leaving Loveman with just the Acroan War in hand?
That's it.
Whew. This has come together beautifully here for Nassif. Fighting to get into the top 8. He's looking to defeat Eli Loveman 2 games to 1. This is game number 3. He has Fires of Invention down. He's drawn 2.
So after some reasonable exchanges where Nassif played the first Clarion, mindful of what would happen if a Nax and Embercleave came together, that combo is really potent. That probably would not have been where Nassif wanted to end up, even if he could barely survive. He didn't go that way, and I think that's reasonable. So now we end up here where Nassif again has a Clarion versus start deploying a creature, but now it's different because Embercleave here is not super scary. 11 life. The Embercleave would only make a 1/1 into a 2/2, so it represent an extra 3 damage or a trade. Doesn't sound super scary when if you had the Clarion back. So here, removal's not so. If you let's say he plays the Sphinx, I think stomping the Berserker is a good play in all lines. You want to still continue to play around Embercleave, etc. Clarion won't wipe it, so stomp that makes perfect sense. But now, do you go for Bonecrusher Giant? Do you go for Sphinx? Do you go for Clarion? To play around removal, you might lead a Bonecrusher Giant. That will let you still be able to block and trade against Embercleave. You didn't lose much. It's not going to be that painful. Sphinx lets you play the same defense, but then also set up for Clarion lifelink. So I think it really comes down to Sphinx versus Clarion. I actually kind of like Sphinx. Now, obviously, if I specifically knew my opponent had a Crone War, then not playing Sphinx is brilliant, because a Crone War would be absolutely backbreaking here. Then you might end up having to play a sweeper and then still face down a 4/4 flyer, and now you went to 8 life in order to do it. So it could be like a game-losing play that Nassif avoids. So interestingly, in this situation, Nassif avoids almost a game-ending mistake, but he's going to play Clarion here, which I actually think, on average, it feels like a worse play to me. So let's try to get out of the mindset of results-oriented thinking, which is really difficult when you can see both hands. But I think working through the different risk and reward from Nassif's side, I think I like Sphinx here, see what my opponent does, whether it's removal or deploying additional stuff to try to get through, then use Clarion to sweep it up. You don't even care if it's an axe, you're happy. Great, take 2 satyrs. I'll crack in for 4 lifelink. I think the Sphinx sets him up better here, but let's see what he does.
Copies of Deafening Clarion. Wouldn't be shocked to see the other one right here, though, as is customary. He is thinking about it.
And he's got plenty of action. He's got the 2 Bone Crusher Giants along with that Sphinx of Foresight. So Eli in a lot of trouble. I mean, he had a fairly good draw for a
He did.
5, right?
He really did.
You know?
Now what can he find? A Lava Coil. Maybe the worst case scenario for him outside of just another mountain. So he's going to have to pass the turn back.
Yeah, it looks like Eli boarded in a lot of reactive cards for the matchup. You're the mono red deck. You want to be a little more proactive. Lava Coil gets some creatures, but not even all the creatures that your opponents can play because of all those Cavaliers. Sure, you can kill a Sphinx, but
now we're going to see Bone Crusher Giant hit the battlefield, but he's not done yet. He can cast something else here. So at least this is a little bit of hope for Loveman, who can Crone War to steal one, or Lava Coil plus Robber of the Rich, or something.
Yeah, and interesting, Nassif actually running out the second Bone Crusher Giant instead of running out Sphinx of Foresight, playing around removal.
All right, so there's Bone Crusher Giant getting stolen by the Crone War.
All right, so Nassif, by virtue of taking what I thought was the weaker line, but it worked out beautifully, does not walk into a Crone War, sweeps the board, opponent draws Lava Coil, has to just say go. Now when Nassif untaps, draws, can play a Sphinx and a Bone Crusher or 2 Bone Crushers. I think wisely chooses 2 Bone Crushers. The opponent, without anything to do, fairly likely has a removal spell. If not, you're probably going to win anyway, so it kind of makes sense. Let me run out these 2 giants. They're kind of on equal footing. It does play around the Crone War again. I mean, this one makes sense. And then your Crone War gets slammed down, and now the Crone War threatens to kind of trade off these for both of these Bone Crusher Giants. How do you approach this turn from Nassif's seat? Well, let's take a look and see what he does, and we'll check back in on with how effective I think it is.
Second chapter forces your opponent's creatures to attack. I'm going to pick a fight.
And
Look at Loveman. He's shaking his head down there.
And Nassif is just thinking about specifically Embercleave.
Yes.
And it's just like, if you have an Embercleave, what's going to happen? I mean, well, you're going to take a lot of damage. And Nassif deciding whether or not he wants to attack with the Bone Crusher Giant, which would feel pretty bad, right? Because that means that the Crone War successfully dealt with both of the Bone Crusher Giants on Nassif's side. And if that happens, I mean, Loveman has the Lava Coil for the Sphinx of Foresight, and then Nassif doesn't have anything.
It's kind of interesting, actually, if that's the way this plays out. Looks like Sphinx of Foresight's going to hit the battlefield here for Nassif. But the truth of the matter is that the next chapter is going to force that Bone Crusher Giant anyway, so maybe Nassif just does it now.
Interesting that he's choosing to attack after running out the Sphinx, but I guess he already...
So this is where the wheels, I think, start to come off a little bit for Nassif. He's a little bit flustered by the Crone War, this one-of that you don't play against a lot in testing, and doesn't really figure out how to approach this turn. So first of all, just playing your any spell before you attack, sort of awkward. But and also the thing that's really awkward here about this attack, it gives your opponent kind of all the optionality. The Crone War is going to make this Bone Crusher Giant attack the following turn anyways. So an opponent who wants to trade is going to be able to trade, but they don't have to. So now Eli can just take it, attack with the Bone Crusher Giant, offer to trade for the better creature, the Sphinx, or deal damage. It kind of gives... Now, giving your opponent optionality is not always bad. With that optionality comes the chance for an opponent to make a mistake. But at the World Championship, you probably should be looking to give your opponent less optionality here and keep this Bone Crusher back. And that way you get to decide whether the Bone Crusher Giants engage in combat or not. And I just think, there's a sense in which if your opponent takes the damage, then I guess, you do get some extra damage. And I just don't think that you can form a game plan here that involves dealing 20 to Eli before something bad happens to you. Opponent was at 20 prior to this attack. I think it's just a little bit too much. The second mistake this turn, I think just playing the Sphinx itself is a mistake. Into the Achrome War at stage 1, that means in chapter 2, in chapter 2, it's going to have to attack, and then in chapter 3, it's going to blow up. So, yes, I aspire here to deal 12 damage and send my opponent to 8, but then what? I lose my Sphinx, whereas playing the Sphinx the following turn into chapter 2 means the Sphinx will live. I'll get my Bone Crusher Giant back, even if I've, kind of made up my mind and resolved to take all this Bone Crusher Giant damage. I'll get my creature back, and then I'll have the Sphinx as well. Here I'm basically playing into chapter 1, lighting my Sphinx on fire to get 4 damage, and I just don't think I'm threatening Loveman's life total enough in order to make that play. So I think a couple mistakes here. Sequencing, giving opponent optionality. Sequencing meaning playing my creature before combat, giving my opponent optionality, and then just playing my creature at the wrong time against that scripted, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 of the Achrome War.
Eli already knows about the Sphinx, so.
Sure. A second copy of Robber of the Rich. So now the second chapter on Achrome War says that Nassif must attack next turn with all of the creatures that are able to do so. But it does feel like the lava coil on the Sphinx really is you don't want to let the scry start going. You don't want to play with fire here, right?
Yeah, but I think Eli's also considering, maybe just force that Sphinx to attack instead, keep up lava coil for a potential follow-up creature.
Oh, sure. And then I can go for... Oh, this is interesting because if this Bone Crusher Giant gets in, I'd put him to 8. Yeah, I think you're right, Paul. I think and look, this is smart, right? Like Loveman has to hope that things go well, up to and including Nassif making a mistake.
Right.
Like he is not in a position where he can say, let's just go card for card and see how the dust settles. It's not going to work that way for Loveman. He's on a mulligan to 5.
And keep in mind, Nassif has to be super concerned about the possibility of an Embercleave off the top. He's got to have a Fires of Invention in play, meaning, he can't actually have speeded removal in response to Ember.
So in what is another interesting turn for Eli this time, your choice is Lava Coil the Sphinx, play Robber, get in for a card off a Robber, and 6 damage, sending Gabe to 5. That's one option. Takes away some of the potency of a Achrome War, but okay, the opponent will be at 5 and will then lose their Bone Crusher Giant but gain 1 back. I'll have 2 Robber the Rich. I won't have my Lava Coil, so I'll kind of be at a stalemate, which is not great. Another choice, don't attack with Bone Crusher Giant, trade them off, the Bone Crusher for Bone Crusher. That way my opponent doesn't get anything back off a Achrome War. Well, if that was the plan, it would have been better to block last turn, but hey, the plan is what it is. We are where we are. So that's an option. Another one is a crack for 4. Opponent probably doesn't want to trade off Sphinx, and so they'll take 4, and then I can play both Robbers of the Rich, and that way, if my opponent has a sweeper, okay, I lose 2 of my creatures, but opponent actually loses 1 of theirs, and they've already used 2 sweepers, and maybe I can't beat it anyways with life gain. Long story short, I think playing both Robbers is reasonable. Eli goes for this weird hybrid approach where it's play 1 Robber, it's kind of playing around a sweeper. I don't love it with 2 sweepers in the graveyard, 2 of those Clarions in the graveyard. And no Lava Coil is fine, attack is fine, Nassif takes it. Basically now, Eli's taking the 12 damage in order to have a Achrome War trade for both those creatures. That's fine. We're going to have a hard time beating Kenrith or Red Cavalier anyways, so I don't mind that. But I think just playing the second Rob of the Rich is probably fine. Remember, that Bone Crusher Giant is not really mine. It's actually Nassif, so I think you just want to stick both those out. But otherwise, pretty reasonable. Both players here have played a creature pre-combat, giving away information about their turn before attacking. That's an obvious inaccuracy most of the time, unless you're in some complicated bluff, which I don't think any player's running here. So that's an inaccuracy from both players. But remember, these are long days. You're going to get tired. You're going to do something maybe a little bit out of sequence. It's important still to make the right attack. And I think, this Bone Crusher Giant attack is fine. So really interesting couple of turns here with this Achrome War. And it's really... neither player really slowed down enough to understand the full implications of the Achrome War and the full implications of what's going on to play a perfect turn. They both kind of played these middling turns, but we'll see what happens.
He took it, dropped down to 7. Not 8. I don't know why I said 8. Down to 7, but that does leave...
Is that a Giant Killer?
Wait, so did Loveman just do nothing here?
No, he attacked for 4.
Yes.
And ran out of Robber of the Rich. And now
What about the other one?
he's holding it in hand to play around a potential Deafening Clarion.
Okay, so he feels like I can cast both of these cards anyway.
Right.
Oh, man.
But given that, I mean, Nassif already cast 2 of them, so it's kind of unlikely that he's going to have another one. Might want to run that out.
Well, I mean, what if you draw, I don't know, Torbrand or, whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
Ember
there's
Cleave.
definitely something to be said for just running it out there, especially because 2 Deafening Clarions were already cast.
All right. This is 8 damage hitting Eli Loveman.
All right, and we got Chandra's Pyro Helix here on Robber of the Rich. And, now is Nassif going to run out a Giant Killer? I mean,
Wow, this has gotten so close, Paul. Nassif down to 7. Giant Killer. There's a Steamkin. Kill the tapped creatures.
right, but Nassif now gets back the Bone Crusher Giant.
Right, of course. Now, again, let's not forget Lava Coil in hand. There is an answer.
This is so incredibly
This
close.
is really, like, if I'm Nassif, I'm going, uh-oh. And by the way, that Akroan War was fantastic.
Right.
For Loveman, it did kill 2 of those things and put Nassif in a situation where things got really awkward. He's now down to 7, now to 5. Elspeth conquers death. He doesn't even have a target for it.
Yeah, I mean, he might still just run it out just to get, closer to getting, a Sphinx back from his graveyard.
Absolutely. Plus,
A couple things to note here. We see that on Eli's turn, because that Robber of the Rich was held, there wasn't the option of, the perfect turn of just Steamkin, blow up your Bunker's Giant, crack with the robbers, rob a card. I mean, those options were closed off because it was in hand, but fine, you got to make the best play you can with what you got. What Eli chose to play was the Robber instead of the Steamkin. So instead of having a 2/2 and opponent at 7 with Robber in hand, it's Robber, opponent at 5, Steamkin in hand. I don't love it. I think that you can even recoup the damage next turn, but and make a similar attack. But also the fact that it is Steamkin and it's going to be a weaker play on a later turn. The Robber didn't trigger, but your opponent might not empty their hand if they don't know you have the Robber. There's a lot going on that I think makes Steamkin a stronger play. And so I don't love that sequencing. Now, again, we are where we are. Gabe draws. Elspeth conquers death. Has to decide. Okay, do I want to try to get something with this? I've got parity here on board, right? With this Giant Killer that can tap the Robber, so I can Elspeth and try to get that chapter up to get to chapter 2, followed by chapter 3, and get a creature back and really start to go. Or I can hold this back and try to exile something like Torbrand, Bone Crusher Giant, that sort of thing. Super interesting. It's not obvious which is best, but I think getting a chapter 3 seems valuable enough that I'm not likely to want to wait here. But I think it's really close. I think it's easy, again, to be results oriented. If you watch the next turns, you can kind of say, oh, well, if the opponent draws Torbrand, I should have held it. If they don't, I should have played it. So this one's razor thin. I'm not prepared to say with any high confidence you got to play it or not. I think I probably lean cast it because chapter 3, getting back a creature, is pretty valuable on this board with Giant Killer to kind of tap down my opponent, at least in the short term.
he doesn't have anything else to do anyway.
Right.
Well, wow. This is a situation where Loveman could steal this.
The Crowan War did so much work this game.
It really did. It felt like Nassif was in such a commanding position after the mulligan and after the good start from him, but we have yet to see any of the true heavy hitters. He's been able to control the game reasonably, but this one is like, he's sweating.
Yeah.
This one could get away from him.
So he's running out an extra copy of Fires of Invention, basically to, normally you keep cards in your hand for a potential Cavalier Flame off the top, but now that Robber of the Rich is in play, you want to make sure you empty out your hand.
That's right. And I guess you just play Elspeth Conquers Death.
Yeah, and you can tap down the Robber of the Rich and, hope to survive. I mean, he's at 5. Eli's got a lot of good draws here, right? Just more things to kind of pressure the battlefield. Oh, and it looks like Nassif actually chose not to run out Elspeth Conquers Death.
Okay, he's going to sit on it, tap down the Robber, Runaway Steamkin hits the battlefield, and Nassif is really hoping for something great off the top of the library, and he doesn't find it. It's Castle Vantress for him.
Yeah, this is really interesting, though.
Like, Nassif's behind now, right?
Well, Castle Vantress is nice because it helps you scry and find something.
Yeah.
However, he needs to use the mana from Giant Killer to keep the Robber of the Rich in check.
He really does.
So he doesn't have the mana to do both.
Look at Nassif's face. This is so close.
Elspeth Conquers, Doesn't.
Loveman looks unbothered by this rather stressful situation.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I mean, that's just an interesting card because there's just so many situations where it's just not going to have a good target.
Yeah. You know, the problem with thinking, well, maybe it'll hit an Embercleave is that you're already dead.
Yeah, I mean, you can get a Torbran, maybe a
Yeah.
Planeswalker or something like that.
Yeah. All right, Elspeth Conquers Death, no targets, hits the battlefield. And, oh my God, it's Embercleave off the
Wow.
Oh,
Wow.
This is a huge draw for Eli Loveman. Is it lethal?
This is
No.
lethal. This is lethal. No matter what he taps down, that with 5 mana, you just need 1 creature to get through. If you target the Runaway Steamkin, it becomes a 2/2. Then it gets +1/+1. That's 6. If he taps on the Steamkin, same thing with the Robber of the Witch. That is lethal.
Eli Loveman just top decked the win with an Embercleave. He's on a mulligan to 5. He's facing
Nassif had 3 creatures.
unbelievable.
Nothing.
He's facing down 2 Fires of Invention and an Elspeth Conquers Death, and none of them are doing anything.
This is unbelievable.
What a rip for Loveman. He calmly says, I'll just send him with both of them. No big deal.
Oh my God. And
Gabriel Nassif has decided that he can take a hit here because he needs to activate Castle Vantress. It's not going to matter.
Oh my
Embercleave and a
goodness.
shake of the head for Nassif. He's
Wow.
like, how did this happen?
keep in mind, Nassif had the chance to play that Elspeth Conquers Death on the previous turn. If he did, Eli Loveman would not have been able to cast that Embercleave this turn.
What a win for Eli Loveman. This is the Embercleave that is going to put him into the top 8. We have seen him perform beautifully today. And look at that. Eli Loveman is through. I cannot believe he won that game, and either can Gabriel Nassif. Look at the look on his face. How did this get away from me?
Well, Magic the Gathering, like all the best games, sometimes beautiful, sometimes frustrating, sometimes both. Hope you enjoyed this analysis today. If you want to support me and my content, go to my sponsor, channelfireball.com, whichever one is on. Channelfireball.com, they're selling singles, supplies. You can also check out my recent article breaking down what I thought about the show they put on at Worlds, the production quality, decisions that were made. That's either up right now or about to go up, depending on when you're watching this. So go check that out, channelfireball.com. Appreciate it. And, like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. You'll get an alert when I post the next video. I appreciate that as well. Take care.